Hi, welcome back to Water Witch Wednesdays. I am Anlin Avalon, the Water Witch. Today happens to be the new moon, and I also had a request over in the Water Magic group to talk a little bit about water and the decaying aspect of it. So within nautical lore, we have this devil type archetype, Davy Jones and Davy Jones' Locker. And just with like water itself, there's a lot of dark aspects to it. We have really dark or deeper, not light and sparkly, merfolk and water creatures. For instance, like the kelpie and other water horses can tend to be very dark and malevolent, I guess we could say. There are also, just with water itself, if you think about water, oftentimes we think first off like rain or a beautiful little stream or a brook, but we often forget that there's things like swamps and marshes. There's actually a lot of water folklore within the swamp magic vein, I guess we could call it. And swamp magic, there's a lot of different things. There's different paths, Southern conjure, and maybe some voodoo and American folk magic, Appalachian folk magic. A lot of these type of practices kind of circle around the American swamp type practice. And it's been a very, very long time since I've actually practiced any swamp magic, and I experienced a lot of it when I was a child, so I don't have a huge knowledge base on the different practices. However, within European and American folklore, there is a lot of swampy or darker water energy connected to swamps, marshes, and bogs. A lot of times in these ecosystems, specifically in the Americas, we have frogs and toads and serpents of a wide variety. As a child, I remember growing up in the Florida swamps, and we had many, many, many frogs and toads and tons of poisonous snakes, rattlesnakes and water moccasins or cottonmouths, coral snakes, and many of these types of animals. So all of these kind of fit into that dark, decaying aspect of water magic. Now let's just think about what happens in a dark swamp. Let's just talk about like the actual water. So the water in a swamp is often stagnant. It usually just kind of is like a lake, very calm and quiet. However, it's oftentimes anywhere from ankle to maybe waist deep and even deeper in some parts. And of course, there are rivers that flow through these areas as well, but I'm speaking specifically of the swamp water where there's trees and cypress knees and Spanish moss hanging down. And in the UK side of things, there's marshes and bogs, and these type of ecosystems. And what happens in these watery, earthy ecosystems is things tend to decay and to fall apart, and I call these maybe dark waters. And we can kind of look at like what's happening in the actual ecosystems and then kind of apply it to magic. Like attracts like, as above, so below. What we work and our practices that we work, reflect the environments and the ecosystems that we live in or work with. And those then reflect the spirits and deity that we work with. And so it's all connected. It would be really hard to connect Aphrodite to swamp magic because she's all about love, and she's more of an ocean spirit. She was born of the sea foam. And so we look at that and we're like, okay, so if Aphrodite doesn't fit in, then what fits in with these darker aspects of water? And they are, you know, you could work with underworld deities. Persephone is not a water goddess at all. I have tried to link her to water, and the only thing I can really link is there's two things. One, when she was abducted, she was playing with nymphs. They could have been water nymphs. And the other thing is that in Hades, you have to cross the river Styx in order to get there. Unfortunately, those are the only two connections to water that she has. I have tried to look and find something, but I have not. However, she fits in with this dark, decaying water aspect because of this underworld energy. Now, think about just a leaf, okay? And so let's say that a tree grows in the swamp and it blooms and has leaves, and then it falls down and it hits the water. And the first thing it does when it hits the water is it floats there for just a little while. And then over time, it becomes waterlogged and torn apart and turned brown, and it begins to kind of seep down into the earth, where it mingles with the rest of these fallen leaves that have turned into mud and have begun to decay. So in a dark water atmosphere, in a still dark water atmosphere, we get this dark underworld feel, this decaying energy. And, this can be worked with through death and rebirth and shadow work, even banishing. You could use this. A really good way to work a death and decaying spell or something like that. If you don't live in the swamp or you don't have access to that type of ecosystem or atmosphere, then what you could do is actually take a black bowl or vessel and fill it with, not beautiful water, maybe some creek water or rainwater or something like that just isn't a really good clean water. And you can write the things that you want to banish or that need to decay out of your life, or fill in the blank. You're creative. You know what you'll need it for, and you could even use a leaf for this, but you could use paper as well. And then let it soak in that bowl of water for a while. And then after a while, it will become kind of mushy. And then what you can do is you can take that bowl of water and the mushy paper that you have your spells written on, and then you can dig a hole in the yard, maybe under a tree in a particularly shady part of the yard, or park or wherever you work, and then you dump the bowl of water and that soggy paper in there. This mimics that swamp energy, and it brings that kind of decaying aspect to your water practice. I think that so often we focus on the positive side of things, the healing aspect of water, and we forget that there is darker aspects of water. I mean, clearly there's a lot of darker aspects with water that's in caves, and the depths of the ocean, and the Great Lakes. I honestly also consider kind of a dark water because they tend to be very treacherous and dark and deep. They're one of the largest, deepest lakes that we've got, and it's just a really interesting thing that we forget that water has this. It's this dual element. Yes, it is healing, it's nourishing, it keeps us alive, but it also has these darker aspects. Another body of water that I consider to be a dark water body are canals. Canals in the Americas, we have a few, like the Erie Canal, and in Arizona they have a canal system that runs through the neighborhoods and the houses to help to drain the water, because it's really difficult to drain and irrigate in Arizona, because there'll be no rain and then there'll be too much. And in the UK, we have a huge canal system, and these were created during the Industrial Revolution, and they hold a lot of ancestral energy, which is very, very strange to me. When I first discovered this, that it was an ancestral body of water, I really had a hard time like reconciling it because it's a new body of water that was man-made, but it has ancestral energy. How does this work? Ghost stories. Ghost stories are what really led me to this understanding that these were ancestral bodies of water that were holding human spirits, or sometimes otherworldly spirits, or spirits from our physical realm that have passed on or are lingering. There's lots of reports of seeing black cats and black dogs and black beasts. This is a common thing throughout witchcraft and especially in the folk magic and traditional side of things. Then there's also tons of stories about the witches that were hung there or the witches that drowned there. There's also stories about murder and all this type of stuff. And so there's a few like really cool ghost story and folk books out there on some of these stories that people have recorded. And the gist of it is that basically there were so many murders and things that had taken place on the canal systems during the Industrial Revolution and after. There's still actually tales of unsolved mysteries and murders that take place on or around these areas. Now, what makes it ancestral is not just the fact that there's lots of murders or people that died or strange situations, but that there's recordings of people seeing these spirits lingering around bridges, under bridges, near tunnels. And if you've ever spent a considerable amount of time on the canal systems in the UK, there's different parts of it that are very beautiful, that run through Stratford-upon-Avon, and are very light and airy, but then there's others that are dark, and they have that very industrial feel to it. A mile-long tunnel, for example. And the energy shifts. It's very interesting to feel the energy shift. However, one of the coolest things about it is the water is a slow flowing body of water. In fact, it doesn't really, I mean, it flows, but not really. It's very stagnant. And even though it's different than the actual swamps in the United States, it has this muddy, dark, murky energy that the swamps often have. Now, this is a really good point that I didn't bring up before about the water in these types of areas, is they're often shallow-ish, meaning 6 feet or 10 feet or less, okay? And they are murky. They're muddy and murky and they're dirty. They're not water that you can drink. It's not water. You can't just walk into the swamp and dip your cup into the middle of it and expect to be drinking crystal clear, pure water. In fact, you're going to get some muddy water with probably some bugs in it. And same thing happens with the canals. In fact, you can't even drink the water in the canals. It's actually kind of dangerous to even touch the water in some parts of the canals because there is disease. And that's another theme, is there's this disease, this decaying ness that's about it. In the swamps, you have lots of moss and parasitic plants. And so you could see that there's this life depending on life for survival. And there are certain things like trees that, thrive in this environment. Cypress trees are not the evergreen, but the actual swampy ones with the big knees that come out of the water. And they're wonderful, wonderful, wonderful trees. They're very majestic and very strong. And I find it also really interesting how the knees kind of pop out of the water, almost like it needs to breathe. Its roots need to breathe in a little bit of sunshine because the water is so muddy and murky. Another common theme within these dark water atmospheres are poison. Now, the canal systems in the UK, a lot of the water you can't drink. We're just going to call it poison. It might not be classified as poison in like some scientific study or something, but it's not good for your body. It's poison. There are a lot of plants that grow within these swamps that are considered poison. A really good example is poison hemlock. Nettle also tends to grow in marshy and swampy waters. And why nettle is actually really, really good for you, it's not a poison. It does not feel good when you're wearing sandals and you put your feet in it. I've made that mistake. And it is nourishing, but it will hurt, and your feet or your hands will be buzzing for a good 15 minutes with the prickliness of that nettle. Poisonous toads and bugs and spiders, and in the Americas, specifically in the swamplands, lots and lots and lots and lots of poisonous snakes. Variety of rattlesnakes, cottonmouths or water moccasins, the pygmy rattlesnake, I mean, that's a rattlesnake, but it's still quite deadly. And so the coral snake. And within this, of course, there's also good snakes, like corn snakes and milk snakes and these type of things. So there's this wide variety of these poisonous themes that run through this. Now, when you get to the ocean, kind of segueing here, and then I'm going to close up, I started by talking about Davy Jones and Davy Jones' locker, and how this was a death and decaying aspect. But if you think about the ocean itself and the power that it holds, the ocean is, especially in the deep, dark waters where, I mean, it's thousands and thousands of feet deep, you know. These places, most of them are largely unexplored, so we don't have a lot of information on them, but we do know that we have a lot of ships that tend to crash, and many, many sailors have been lost over the years. It's a common theme for storms to rise up. Storms are not bright and sunny. They are dark. They roll in across the waters. The dark clouds roll in across the dark water, dark deep waters, and they obscure the sun and that reflective light, and they beat down this dark water, and they bring up all these winds and waves, and many times the ships get crashed and broken. Within just the power of the waves hitting, it can destroy well-made ships. I have to bring it up because it's part of it, the Titanic, and that ice aspect as well. The harshness of the ice brought down and destroyed the Titanic, and probably human error as well, but there was many that died there as well. So it's not just the storm energy that can be dark and decaying, but also ice. Ice can destroy, just like the darker aspects of water or the unlit aspects of water. If you've ever taken a spinach leaf and put it in the freezer and then brought it out and tried to eat it, it's weird. The frozen water changes its structure. So that's something to also keep in mind. But once, going back to the darker aspects of water and on the seas and storms, once the water has destroyed these ships, it brings all the pieces down, well, scatters them actually, and then brings them down slowly over time. They fall to the bottom where they decay, and where animals and creatures begin to either feed on them or grow on them, and plant life surrounds them, perhaps barnacles and other things like that begin to kind of form on them. So why this dark and decaying aspect is very dark and gruesome and destructive, there's another aspect to it that I want to mention before we finish, and that's the rebirth aspect. Specifically with the bringing down the ship. You bring down the ship, the water destroys everything, falls down to the bottom, and then you have a beam of wood underneath the ocean that's decaying. And then little barnacles begin to grow. And then other little creatures begin to grow. And then things that feed off of all these other little creatures, and they begin to grow and grow. Same thing that happens in the swamp is the leaf that we talked about before. It falls down and it begins to decay down to the bottom of this swampy water where it becomes mud. But this is very nutritious mud. And so then those trees that the leaves fall from then begin to take the nutrients from the swampy waters into their roots, and this helps to feed them, and it brings life back. So there is a dark aspect to it, but that dark aspect and the destruction of it can often bring about this real positive rebirth energy, or the constructive use of death and decaying, and turning that into nutrition for the plant life and animal life that's around. Anyways, I talked a lot longer than I wanted to on this. Thank you so much for listening to me ramble, and I will talk to you again soon. Have a wonderful Wednesday. Bye-bye.